This is a download from the University of California, Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. To find out more, visit bampfa.berkeley.edu.
Good afternoon. I'm very glad to have Michael and Susan here. Michael, of course, being the first Matrix curator. My name is Liz Thomas. I'm the current sixth Matrix curator. And Susan Rothenberg, who was one of the first three Matrix artists who shared the initial run in the Matrix galleries 30 and a half years ago, February of 1978. We are here today in the fourth of a series. The fifth, we've just confirmed a date for myself and Paul Chan on February 8th, 2009, which we're very excited about. Paul will have an upcoming project in Matrix still to be scheduled in 2010. And we want to thank the supporters of the Matrix anniversary, which is now winding down, but has been going on for about a year now. So we want to, of course, thank the gift from Phyllis C. Wattis that makes all of our activities possible. And then also special support by Jane and Jeffrey Green, Joachim and Nancy Bechtel, Rena Branston, James Pick and Rosalind Ladati, Barclay and Sharon Simpson, Penelope Cooper and Rena Rosenwasser, and Doris and Donald Fisher, who make these particular anniversary programs possible. I'm just going to briefly introduce Michael and Susan and then let them talk. They are old friends and have a lot to say to each other for our benefit. Michael, as I said, was the first curator of the Matrix program, directing it from 1978 to 1980, organizing exhibitions with Ree Morton, James Lee Byers, William Wegman, Jay DeFeo, Willem de Kooning, Robert Irwin, Louise Bourgeois, and Richard Serra, just to name a few. I think there were something like 14 rotations in his first year. He's currently the chief curator at the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth, where, at least in my estimation, he's realized one of the most sublime marriages of art and architecture in the permanent collection installations in the beautiful Tado Ando building, which is still fairly new. He's also organized many important exhibitions there, including recently Declaring Space, Lucio Fontana, Yves Klein, Barnett Newman, Mark Rothko, a pairing of Agnes Martin and Richard Tuttle, and surveys of the work of Philip Guston and Anselm Kiefer, among many others. Prior to this, he was the chief curator at the Albright Knox in Buffalo, where he organized an important survey of Susan's work, Paintings and Drawings 1973 to 1993, which traveled extensively. He was also the commissioner of Jenny Holzer's site-specific installation at the American Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 1990. He has a recent book encompassing 30 years of interviews and outtakes with his intimate and informal conversations with artists such as Georg Baselitz, Robert Bechtel, Louise Bourgeois, Anselm Kiefer, Agnes Martin, Bruce Nauman, Richard Tuttle, and Bill Viola, among many others. We are really fortunate to have Susan here. As I mentioned, she was one of the first three Matrix artists whose work formed the debut of the program. Her exhibition came at the beginning of what has become a long and distinguished career and included several of the large-scale, iconic horse paintings for which she quickly gained attention. Rothenberg's work has always considered questions of painting qua painting, that is, questions of representation and abstraction, form and expression, color and emotional tenor, while remaining firmly rooted in life and the observation of her own world. Her first major survey, initiated in 1983 by LACMA, traveled to our friends across the bay at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh, and the Tate Gallery in London, among other places. In addition to the Albright Knox retrospective, major surveys have been mounted at the Museo d'Arte Contemporaneo in Monterrey, Mexico in 1996, and at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston in 1999. Most recently, she exhibited in the 2007 Venice Biennale and the Site Santa Fe Biennial in 2004. She won the Skowhegan Medal for Painting in 1998 and Sweden's Rolf Schock Prize in 2003. Please join me in welcoming Michael and Susan.
Oh, I do? Okay. Okay. Is that better? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll kick things off, if it's okay with you, Susan. Being the very first Matrix curator, which is the curatorial version of Cro-Magnon man, I think the medical center here should x-ray my brain because we thought differently than young curators think today. And one thing that I want to say that I don't want it to get lost in translation, and that is that in 1977, artists, with few exceptions, with a few key exceptions, really didn't have one-person museum exhibitions. They were in group shows. Oh, I'm sorry. In 1977, with a few key exceptions, artists didn't really have into the mic. Oh, you've really got to, okay. I got it, sorry. One more time. In 1977, in my recollection is artists really didn't have one-person exhibitions in museums. And the point of the Matrix program was to introduce contemporary art to a general museum-going public. It seems inconceivable to think that that was the case, because today contemporary artists are all over the place. They're in every museum, and they're with us all the time, 24/7. But this was Susan's first, correct me if I'm wrong, Susan, museum exhibition.
True.
Yeah, and it was a big deal for us. I don't know how you felt about it, if you thought, wow, this is great to be in a museum, but...
Oh, yes, it was very exciting. I kind of couldn't believe it. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Oh, okay.
There you go.
Very, really scary. Have it in your face. I was very excited, Michael, believe me.
And the other thing that I didn't want to get lost in the translation is the fact that when these paintings were made in the mid-1970s, they took people aback. They took me aback. As a young, hip curator who really thought he was hipper than hip, nothing could sort of throw me off my feet. These paintings really bowled me over. And you'll have to remember, you know, you're walking through Soho and you walk in a gallery and you see a room full of Bryce Marden paintings. And then you walk down the street and you see a Frank Stella retrospective at MoMA. Or, you know, what you're looking at basically is abstraction. And then all of a sudden you walk into a gallery and someone has painted horses. It made no logical sense whatsoever, which was what made it seem so great. And I guess the first question I'd ask you was, how self-aware were you of the fact that you were doing something that almost seemed ludicrous? You know what I mean?
I experimented with abstract painting. I moved to New York when I was 25. I was very lucky to have quickly acquire, through the loft that I acquired, a brand new circle of friends, many of whose names you would know. And I was kind of like going to every gallery, going to every concert, going to every performance thing, and painting abstract paintings at home, which left me completely cold. I was sewing things. I thought I could be radical by not stretching canvases. I slashed canvases. And the horse thing happened one afternoon in a doodle. I did a doodle, a small painting of a horse, sort of related to my love of cave art. And to make it look like Frank Stella, I painted notches into the corners. And then I drew a line down it, because nothing was supposed to be, painting had a lot of rigid tenets at those times, and everything was supposed to be flat. You were not supposed to allude to space in 1970. 1969. Oh, 70, well, yeah. I got to New York in 1969. And I doodled the horse, I drew it on envelopes, I fiddled with it. I finally decided to make it slightly under life size. And then I just went with it. I didn't ask myself any questions. I didn't have any ambitions in the art world. I thought my husband was going to be the famous artist in the family. And I wanted to paint. And things just happened. But it was not, I did not set off to even be public with this work. But it happened.
Let's, if we could go to the next slide. This is a shot of your first show at Willard Gallery, I think. Is that right? In 75, 76?
75.
75,
Yeah.
76. And if we could go to the next slide. Is this
That's
the doodle?
That's the doodle. That began the whole thing. It's about 2 feet by 2 feet.
And you told me that when you did this, you looked at it and then you put it away for a year? You kind of hid it?
I have to tell you, I don't remember, but
Okay.
I was a little spooked, and I couldn't imagine that it was just an afternoon's entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
But it stuck in my mind, but I don't know how long I avoided the issue of it. Till I got good and sick of my abstract paintings.
Right. Could we go to the next slide? And this is a painting called Non Maubier from 75, or from 74.
Right. These paintings just started to tumble out onto yellow pads, and everyone had to be slightly different. And I started doubling up, figuring out the outline could indicate a second image, perhaps, or a shadow of an image. And I was also, at that time, trying to keep it very, very still. I didn't want any motion in the paintings, and you'll see that changes, because my mantra was, don't do the same painting twice, ever. There has to be some different issue going on in each one of these works. And my palette was burnt sienna mixed with white paint and black. I wasn't in any way interested in color relationships.
I think the other...
These are all about 5, 6, 7 feet by 5, 4, something like that, about my size.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing to keep in mind, and everyone has selective memory, but at the time these paintings were made, painting didn't seem to be the most relevant thing. Sculpture was the most relevant thing. It was a period of Donald Judd, of Richard Serra, and then post-minimalist art with Bruce Nauman. You know, there would be stuff scattered all over a floor of a Soho gallery. Large objects, very simple objects. Painting, it seemed to me, and I'll editorialize, not everyone will agree with this, but painting had kind of exhausted itself by around 1970. It had moved through abstract expressionism. It had gone into second generation abstract expressionism, color field painting.
And then minimalism, and that was the rule of the day when I moved to New York.
Which was
Richard Serra was king.
Yes, and Judd.
And it was, and Judd, and Phil Glass was making minimalist music, as Steve Reich was, and people were measuring things, and Robert Morris was putting blocks into rooms, and painting was not well.
and there was a very famous space called 112 Green Street, where everyone showed. Everyone who was anybody had a show at 112 Green Street. And you can Google 112 Green Street, and you'll be
you should. It's fascinating.
Stunned by the names. But
that was because it was a warehouse. It was the first warehouse space downtown. It was not a white gallery with 3 little rooms. It was a warehouse. And boy, that was exciting to those sculptors.
And you were the first painter to show at 112 Green Street, which was an amazing thing. And those were big paintings. These are, say, 5 or 6 feet across. The 112 Green Street paintings, which were United States, Dos Equis, was Dos Equis one?
Dos Equis.
Those were 20 feet or 8?
One was 24,
24.
By 10 or 12. One was 12 by 24, and one was 14 by 12 or something. They were big.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the only piece I've ever done as an installation, because I knew that the other paintings you're looking at would look like postage stamps in that warehouse. So I deliberately created these 3 big paintings for that space.
So this was Susan's work, to my mind, as a curator, someone who was actively watching what was going on, was telling me that painting is coming back. It's finding a new way. A new door is opening. You know, as people say, whenever a door closes, look for the other door to open. And her work was a new door opening. It was just a really strange pathway, though. The idea that she would paint these horses. And none of us, and to this day we talk about what they mean, have really figured out what these horses mean, whether it was some people thought of it as a feminine image or a feminist image.
No. No. What it was a combination of my admiration for Jasper Johns' iconic paintings of targets and flags. He found an image and really let his painterly wallop go. The figure was absolutely verboten in the world that I lived in, the downtown art world. And I think that the horse was a step away enough for the figure for me to approach it, and also I did not have a close relationship to horses, so it was almost a target or a flag for me. And also it was something that was alive. It seemed very important to paint an image that wasn't a car or a, I didn't want to do still lifes. I think it was a surrogate figure in a way.
And also when Susan had her first show at Willard Gallery in '75, the reviews for the show were unanimously fantastic. I mean, even Hilton Kramer, the curmudgeon Hilton Kramer, raved about the show, which was slightly embarrassing for
Yeah,
me, I'm
Richard
sure.
Serra said I wouldn't be too proud of that review,
Yeah,
Susan.
exactly. Nobody wants a good review from Hilton Kramer.
We don't want to be liked by Hilton Kramer.
And one of the things that fascinated me about Hilton Kramer's review was that he kept talking about the quality of the painting and the brush stroke and again, the quality of the painting as if the horse wasn't there. As if there was no horse. It's as if he was talking about a Morris Louis painting, and which is, in a funny way, was generational. If we could move to the next slide. This is a shot of you in your, is this the Watts Street studio?
No, this is West Broadway.
West Broadway.
Yeah.
And to the next slide, please. I guess one of the things I wanted to point out was when the critics talked about these early horses at first, it was all about their iconic stillness. And in fact, if you looked at the horses as they developed, they were moving. I mean, a lot of them were in motion. They were falling down or they were jumping.
Yeah, this is a very transitional one, in that I didn't want the horse to truly move, but I tipped it in the picture plane. I wanted a different relationship to the edges of the canvas. So without much commotion, I tilted the whole image, which gave it a strange, it was on the way to dealing with motion a bit.
Right.
So this is a, I think this is the painting, that the modern painting.
It is. This
Yeah.
is the Moderns painting. And at the time, you've told me that you were interested in Muybridge's photographs.
Yeah.
And although I don't remember you saying it then, but now in recent years you've talked about the fact that you were very interested in cave painting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Sienna and white was my color, earth color, and simplicity of animal forms and the power that they can invoke was something very visceral. I am an animal lover.
Next slide. Now, I think it's really bizarre to paint a horse in a time of abstract painting, but to paint a horse in a white bathrobe, something yet again. That I think that really takes it to another level.
This was unique. There was no follow-up on this. I didn't put a baby doll dress on a horse, or didn't. But I had this idea that if I was really using this image in ways that it had been used before, but differently somehow, that I had to try this medieval thing. I had to cloak it. This was a cloaking, and it is what it is. But it didn't help me move on. So it's one of a kind, and it's kind of an anomaly.
Well, you didn't really, as I recall, you didn't show these paintings.
This painting I didn't show.
No. And so those of us who are trying to figure out what the horse, this would have been a great clue to have, needless to say, when you're looking at these early horse paintings, because all of a sudden, if the horse is a cover for something, and then you cover the horse, you're starting to talk about covering. You're not.
I never even thought of that.
There's something else going on. So if we could do the next slide. And this is on the right are some paintings of Mary Warrenoff, your friend.
Yeah. I wanted to see what it was like to have a human model pose as a horse.
And this is,
That's the result, 3 medium-sized paintings of Mary.
And on the left is a painting called Mukara. So it's a separate painting. And again, there's an aspect of motion going on here. What I'm not showing, and I could have, but for the sake of modesty, for Susan did a series of really interesting test photographs of herself nude posing as a horse, hands and knees. And it really is fascinating to see those, you know, but it's only in retrospective. Until I did that big show of yours, I didn't know that you had done those.
Yeah, yeah. It was tentatively approaching the human figure and then running away again.
Right, right. Can we go to the next one? I've always wanted to show this as a slide comparison. I've never done it. On the left is a photograph of Susan Rothenberg in a Joan Jonas performance. Now, Susan is the one in the ring, and her feet and hands are attached to the inside of the ring, and in the performance, she's being rolled along Joan's beach, right?
Yeah.
Have I got this right?
Yeah.
And then on the right is Butterfly, the painting that was in the Matrix show. I mean, I just can't help but think that you're measuring, you know, you're measuring the canvas.
I've never had that connection made. You've never even said that to me.
No, I did it. Yeah, I know I haven't.
No.
But I thought today would be a good day.
That's very funny. First of all, that was completely Joan Jonas's idea.
It was.
Yeah. I was a member of her performance troupe for a couple of years. This painting is, you notice that I used thin lines previously to divide the horse in half. In this case, I let the lines become so thick that they became part of the image. The apex of the meeting of the X is buried within the image of the horse. So I can't connect them mentally. I certainly can connect them visually, but this was following orders and this was giving orders.
True, true. But this followed this, and even though that wasn't your idea, it's embedded.
The X.
And the other thing that I'm doing a small show of Susan's work that will open in about a year, and part of the theme of the show, which is why I keep hammering at this thing about movement, is that there is something about the activity of what's going on in Susan's compositions that is not this iconic image. It's a moving image. And Susan was in a number of Joan Jonas performances.
Yeah.
She's, how do I want to describe you? An avid dancer. I mean, she's a very active, physical woman. She paints physically, and before she was a painter, I mean, you studied sculpture. She then got involved in performance, and as I often like to point out, she was a go-go dancer at one point. This is true, short-lived, but I'm on the one hand, this painting on the right, you could say, well, it really is about that idea of flatness and measuring the canvas in a way that relates to color field painting. But a lot of these paintings, to me, also relate to your sculpture and performance background.
Interesting.
I mean, I don't...
What I see is that one of the things that I think every painting should have is tension.
Mm.
So what I was doing there was making motion and stopping it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also an aspect, because every performance has a stopping point, and every good performance should have tension in it.
Right.
And also, I have another little mantra, which is there should be 3 elements to the painting: the figure, the ground, and the something else.
Okay.
Something else.
So this is your second show at Willard Gallery,
Right.
which is 78. What is the date of this? I'm trying to remember now. 79. This is 1979, and here, now, the profile horse image has been turned frontally. And in a number of cases, the horse is charging out of the canvas towards the viewer and leaning to its side. Could we have the next slide, please? This is a painting that is here in a San Francisco collection called Squeeze, Francis Bowe's collection. And here the horse is being taken apart, literally.
Yes.
Or figuratively. The next slide, please. And there's this sense that she's actually killing the horse off. This is the way I always read this. I know that's too literal of a narrative, probably.
Well, you're not seeing many of the paintings that were steps on the way, but at a certain point, I was about to repeat myself. You know, there was a center line, then I started using margins to lock the image in, then the lines got thicker, and at a certain point, I did what I wanted to with geometry. I wasn't going to jump hoops to get odd, different kinds of like geometry into the painting. So the horse started to really disintegrate, became its parts.
Right.
The other thing I think a lot about is the whole and the parts that make up the whole.
And I guess what makes any art really interesting is that there are different readings that you can take on it. And where I've always seen, if we could have the next image, these images is starting to revolve around the edge of the canvas, a sense of movement. And you know, color field painting involved what Clifford Still used to call edge action. A lot of stuff took place on the edges. And that's why in a Franz Klein painting, you see this slice going across the painting, this gesture. It flies off the edge of the painting. It's fighting and going into battle with the edge of the painting. But you had said that at the time what you were interested in here was actually taking it apart and looking at each piece.
Right, and putting it into a different and new, strange relationship.
Right.
It's rearranging its parts to create the unexpected, I guess, to surprise myself.
I love this.
These are works on paper. These are
Right.
paintings on large paper.
And if we could have the next one. So now we're going to jump, and we're going to miss some, for the sake of time, we're going to miss some paintings on the way.
The demise of the horse.
The demise of the horse.
Yeah.
Horse is now bye-bye.
Yeah.
And now you start with this series of drawings.
Yeah, these are
drawings.
real little.
And could you describe what they are?
I went into a spin when I realized that I didn't have any horse paintings left to do in my own mind. So I thought, what have I got? I've got a head and a hand. So I put those two things together. Just fooling around, you know. You're not always trying to make a piece of art. You're trying to think, what's at hand here for me? And I just related to my tools as a painter.
Mm-hmm. And
That's all.
These are about this big. So
No, they're even smaller.
even smaller than that.
I think
Okay.
there's about 8 inches square.
Okay, okay. And from these, if we could have the next slide. Oh, no, these are also small. The next slide. This is a 10-foot by 10-foot head and hand painting. I mean, these are huge. This is at the in Utica, New York, at the.
I don't remember where they
Yeah.
go. Yeah, this is kind of the nighttime version they evolved. I decided to take a chance on that little exercise you just saw. And I rented a studio from a friend of mine because my studio didn't, I only had 2 painting walls and the ceilings were just under 10. And I wanted to see if this is going to go, this is going to be big. So I did 4 paintings
Right.
with the head and the hand.
And they were in a show at Willard, weren't they at Willard? I remember seeing that show, and it was.
I think, yes, they were, Michael.
Very intense.
They were.
Big, big heads and hands in your face. And then the next slide, please.
My one and only self-portrait.
Exactly, exactly. But it's not really a self-portrait because it's a mask, isn't it? One of the.
I have a thing for masks, and I was again can get very timid when it gets down to conventional thinking. So I thought, how can I distance myself from painting a picture of myself? And I put the paper tabs on like a paper doll,
Right.
and then gave it that mask-like quality.
And a cigarette.
And a cigarette.
Yeah. Next slide, please. I just wanted to give people a sense of the size of your studio as your career developed. And it got, as the studio got bigger, the paintings got bigger
Yeah,
and more gestural.
This was my old studio, which was about 20 by 45 feet.
This is Watts? or-
No, this is West Broadway.
West Broadway again,
Yeah.
okay. Next slide, please. This is Susan in a painting called Patches, and then the next slide. So this is Patches.
Other ideas relating to fragmenting the horse, I did approach the human figure, but again, it had to be my way. That's a spinal cord floating outside of it. It's one arm turning into 3 arms. And the black patches are how I started the painting. I didn't know how it was going to go, so I needed a strong compositional thing to focus against, and I ended up staying in the black patches as a purely abstract element.
But now you're actually painting the figure. I mean, you're not,
Yeah.
you know, they're half figures, but you're actually making figurative paintings.
Yeah, you could say so, ever since. I mean, still and now.
Next slide, please. And then you got into this strange area, and this is where your work always fascinates me, because it moves from this very formal side, this idea, well, I really want this black patch to work, and I want to balance with this white void area. And then you get these visionary ideas, and this is a painting of Mondrian, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Again, I was working at charcoal on a drawing. I drew basically this image. It looked like a combination of William Burroughs and Mondrian. I have the greatest respect for Mondrian. He's as opposite a painter as you could ever find from me. But he searched for the essence of things, and that's very inspiring to me, that he found them. He's a man that found his end game by the end of his life. So I just did a little homage to my love of him and his efforts.
and then the next slide, please. And this is Mondrian dancing.
Which apparently he did a lot of in Harlem. I allowed myself a couple of fantasy paintings in there to slip in between these like more cogitated series of works.
But dancing relates to the performative side of
Yes.
your psyche. I mean,
Yeah.
I see it in the paintings. Now,
Yeah.
as I said, there's the formal element, but there's
Yeah.
a kinetic psychology going on.
Yeah, I think I relaxed all the earlier rules that I'd been indoctrinated with by the art world in general. And I just painted whatever I wanted at this point in my life.
Right. And this is, now we're talking 1984, 85. Next slide.
So I'm in a decade out of the
horses.
into my so-called public career. Yeah.
Right. And you got even more private when you moved to New Mexico. I
Yeah,
mean,
but that wasn't. Well, that was 90.
90. And this is a photograph of this is fascinating me. She lives with the artist Bruce Nauman, so we have a husband and wife artist team living together, and they live outside of Santa Fe in Galisteo, and they have a lot of land. And the house is designed very simply. It's not very ostentatious, but it's like this long house structure with guest area and the master bedroom over here. And then you go out through a back screen door, and there is this little plaza area. If you go to the right, you go to Susan Rothenberg's studio. If you go to the left, you go to Bruce Nauman's studio.
And never the twain shall meet.
And never the twain shall meet. But they're almost exactly the same size. And it's funny, sometimes I'll be there sitting drinking coffee at the kitchen table, and I'll see her go over there and him go over there. And it's just an interesting study, because I've seen them both go in the studio and neither one of them make a thing. They go in and read.
Yeah.
But you do it every day.
Every day in the studio, most of the day.
Every day, which
Yeah.
is, that's part of the discipline of being an artist. If you have
Yeah.
an idea, you better be there.
That's exactly right, Michael. Yeah, and it
Yeah.
won't happen if you're driving your car.
Exactly.
I mean, it might not happen.
Next slide, please. So this is Susan walking away from her studio.
This place is a jungle now.
Yeah. And next slide, please. This is the door to Susan's studio. Next slide. And then this is a series of paintings that you did not long after you moved to New Mexico, right?
I actually think I did this painting in New York. Bruce
In
and
New-
I, after we met and courted and married, had a long-distance courtship for a year and a half. And it was tough to be apart because we did fall quite madly in love. And I think part of this is the wrenching the human body.
Mm-hmm.
because there was meetings and partings and meetings. I flew there, he flew here. But my daughter was in high school, and I just wouldn't leave her to go to New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And Bruce had his studio in New Mexico. So we were apart most of the time.
So, of course, the way I read this is that it's a spinning figure, because that's my theory, right? And I refuse to give it up. but as Susan describes it, it's, it really is, it's a human psyche being bent and sort of torn, because as Susan described it to me, they were trying to travel back and forth between New York and Mexico, and they weren't, until they actually got married and moved in together in New Mexico, it was this.
Oh, we got married long before I went to New Mexico.
Yeah. Oh, you did? Okay.
We got married 4 months after that dinner party.
Okay.
But then we continued to commute for another year.
Okay. Next slide, please.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I know you like to do the smart part,
Mm-hmm.
but
Well,
there's a lot of emotion in the work.
goes without saying. And is this the honeymoon then?
No, you said that other it was bent out of shape.
Yeah.
This one's ripped.
This one, yeah, but this was pretty
Ripped in
sexy.
half.
This is a pretty sexy, yeah.
Yeah, it is
painting.
sexy.
And I'm proud to say the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth owns this one.
And it also relates to the painting Squeeze, where I squeezed the head between the legs.
Right.
There's a
Right.
lot of this displacement thing that
Yeah.
I do.
Next slide, please. And then this is a completely different chapter in your work, to my
Yeah.
mind. This is where you're actually sort of recreating pictorially an event,
Yeah.
not a phenomenon.
New Mexico
an event.
I got out of my head and into events that happened at our ranch. In this case, Bruce being thrown from a horse.
So these are the horse's legs on the left. And is this a fence where he hit the fence?
It's a
or-
flying board from a corral.
Okay. Is that blood on the board, or just,
No, it's just color.
just color? And is that Bruce's head or your head?
That's me.
Watching the event.
Yeah.
From this disembodied place somewhere in the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Next slide, please. And this is a painting that's owned by the Albright Knox Art Gallery called Chinese Goat, which is a goat jumping.
Yeah.
And
An arm and parts of some thighs,
Mhm.
kind of the upset of the action. And
Mhm.
yes, it was real. We had a goat, and the goat became very cantankerous and jumped on top of cars and butted me and the dogs and finally went away. But it was fascinating to have a goat.
Mhm.
I'd never had a goat.
I mean-
So it's a fragment of a body and an action. That's all.
Well, I remember you also telling me when we did that show many years ago that the move to New Mexico, one of the things that stuck in Susan's mind was that she was out on a ranch now, and violent things happen on a ranch on a daily basis. A coyote will kill a rabbit, or horses will trample a rattlesnake, or and you were seeing these things
Yeah.
for the first time,
Yeah.
and they got worked out in the paintings.
Yeah. I thought for a while I was standing around waiting for a catastrophe to happen so I could have a new image to paint. Macabre.
Next slide, please. And this is, what is this, deer with leg? What is this?
No, this is actually one of the ways that the dogs played with the goat.
Oh, right.
Was they would go after his leg and make him run three-legged and gently hold one of his legs in their mouth. It was just something the dogs did. And the goat would hobble along on three legs, and the dog would not bite into the leg. It was just another event in the ranch.
What I love about these paintings, all of these in this whole series, is that they deal so much with how memory works
Yes.
in painting.
Yes, because none of these were done in any way close to when the action happened.
Right.
They were all reconceived in the studio,
Right.
and then lots of parts were left out.
And how much do you actually remember?
Yeah,
And then how much do you actually need to tell
Yeah,
to recreate it?
yeah. That's you just have to feel out in your painting as it progresses.
Mhm.
It's not a plan.
Do you remember why you needed this blast of orange red?
No,
down
but can
here?
you picture the painting without it?
No, I can't. But it's fantastic. I wouldn't have meant,
I just needed it. I knew
Yeah.
I did. I just got bold.
But that's the interesting thing about your approach to painting, which is this thin line or this pivot point between I'm representing something on the one hand, on the other hand, I'm just applying liquid dirt
Yeah,
to canvas.
yeah.
And at what point the recognition between the two cross? At one point it's pure painting, at what point it's never pure representation.
No, it's
and
never
it's
pure.
never pure painting.
No,
This
it's
is
never
not a
pure,
Robert
pure
Ryman.
abstraction. And it's also, that's a very good point about memory, and it's also reinterpreting the event in terms of making a painting, making the painting work at the cost of the event.
Right.
The event never matters anymore once the painting gets going. And this one I really scraped hard. You can see a lot of palette knife work. There were a lot more elements in this painting that I ended up taking out, which I do a lot of. Get less in there, get less in there. Give it more punch, but get less superfluous imagery out of there. Editing.
Yeah, it is fascinating to visit Susan when she's making a series of paintings, because you can go in and see images on these canvases and then come back in a month and she will have been working daily on each of these canvases, and there's more missing, a lot more missing. As she's adding, she's eliminating.
Yeah.
That's another irony of painting. Each stroke takes away something that was there.
You just have to sit back and look at it and saying, what will it take for this painting to make it?
Right.
It's not going out of my studio, it's not going anywhere till it speaks on its own terms.
But you never give up the original impetus for the image.
I usually stick with my plan. The impetus.
Because you give the title.
Yeah.
You tell us what the inspiration was.
Yeah.
This was, an accident or...
Right.
Next slide, please. This is the inside of your studio in Galisteo.
Some of my doggies. And this painting is The Chase. It's about 6 dogs and 2 rabbits, and that's an early stage of it.
I've been going through some old photos for this book we're doing, and the designer who I'm working with, I'm spreading them all out, and he came to me one day and he said, Michael, do you realize that in almost 80% of these photographs there's always a dog? It's true.
There always is a dog
Because you've always
around
had
me.
a dog, and the dogs,
Yeah.
they're always in there with you when you paint.
Yeah, most of them are.
Next slide. I threw this in because I don't know what it is. It's some matches and it's a drawing.
Yeah,
And it's a
everything I
photograph
do
I
is on
took,
yellow
and so-
pads. It's a shame because now when I really want to make a drawing that's a drawing, I have to staple it to the wall. But on yellow pads, I just, I have tons of them.
Next slide, please.
That's my
Just want to show you
close
how
up of
clean
my,
this studio
my table.
is. Next slide. What I want to know is, how does the turkey and the chicken formula work
I think
in
it's a-
terms of the consistency of
I believe that's holding turpentine.
Oh, okay.
The dog
Because
food can.
de Kooning used mayonnaise.
Yeah, you did
and-
a nice close up there,
Yeah,
Mike.
yeah.
In the
I'm
ashtray.
showing this just to give you an idea of how much paint is actually used in the creation.
Yeah,
of
I
one
don't
of
know
these
if that
paintings.
comes through in the sides. There's quite a lot of.
Next
Of
slide.
paint. That's my table. I try and mix up colors and then put them in a can and use a brush, but then the brush always goes in the wrong can, and I put the yellow brush in the white can. So then I started using the table and just squeezing, and getting all these different colors till it's the right color.
Can you pretty much track the change in your palette to to the move to New Mexico? Because
Yeah.
before that it was chalky whites
Yeah.
and sienna.
Yeah.
And now it's every color
No, I
imaginable.
stopped being afraid of color, and then I had to go about learning color, which is something I'd never ever done.
Mhm.
How does color work? How does one color go next to another? How do you decide what color something should even be?
Mhm.
But a lot of it has to do with that harsh white New Mexico light, which
Mhm.
strangely enough, I didn't you see as white. I saw it as orange and yellow and red and
Mhm.
black. Yep.
Next slide. And this is another one of these drawing pads that are scattered all over the studio. And on this pad, you're seeing some drawings for these new paintings that Susan's just finished, and they truly are bizarre. They're very weird paintings, but the more I think about it, the more they play back through the tape.
Yeah.
And if we go to the next, there are these arms and hands.
Actually, that one is sideways
Mm.
and unfinished, but it is sideways.
Next slide. So here's a painting. Those were drawings. So I remember when I guess it was about 6 months ago, I was at the studio and I said, so what are these? What's going on? And well, they're puppets. And then Susan took it one step further, or prosthetics. I'm not sure which.
Oh, it's a million colors, but it's sort of a dirty yellow white, and the legs are pink and maroon and gray, and there's hands up at the top holding the so-called puppet board. Those white forms are a hand in the corner, top corner, and an arm. So it's like puppet parts. Pardon me? This,
This year.
2007, 2008.
These aren't.
I'm still doing a little bit of cleanup work on this painting. I go back after they're done and see what, if anything, bothers me. And there's a couple of things I want to change before they go out the door. Okay?
So to my mind, in this image, what you see, by a painter, by the way, who has never really painted a complete figure, but fragments of a figure mostly, you see hands manipulating, like a puppet, other figurative parts.
Right. It's just another, these paintings are another way to address
That.
human
Yeah.
life, human body, human form.
Next slide, please.
Parts of bodies or parts of puppets.
And I remember you saying, I don't know how serious you were about it, that you made a kind of a quick comment about the Iraq War.
Yeah.
And, you know, guys,
I think it's in the consciousness.
yeah.
And when you're thinking about puppets and then you start just taking them apart, which I always tend to do with my images, without my willing it, you'll see, I think you have a painting of the one that was most disturbing to me to paint.
Next slide. Next slide. In
Well,
here,
the-
you mean? Oh.
Yeah, maybe you don't have it. That's the puppeteer in there, the yellow form. These colors are really way off. But
Yeah.
what can we do? And this was an interim stage. It's kind of a little less chopped up, this painting, but again, it's the puppeteer
But
and the puppet parts.
do you see them relating to those when the horse was coming apart?
Yes, sure.
You know, I mean,
It's what my brain tends to do.
mhm. Next slide.
That's the one.
That's a beauty.
It's not very well
this right side up?
lit. Yeah, it is. It's a leg, an arm, and a partial leg. But also, I'm very. You may have noticed that there's no landscape lines in any of these paintings. Everything floats in the field of the painting.
Mhm.
So this was to make it float sideways was interesting to me. But this is the one that started to look a little scary.
Well, this is the last image I have, so maybe this would be a good
Oh.
time to let the audience ask some questions.
Oh yeah, that's the
Rather-
last.
Oh, that's the last. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's the real upside. I intended to do the whole series as upside down puppets, as in anti-gravity. But they started to be right side up or floating through space or, jumping. I let them do what they wanted. But this was the first of the series and is the loosest painted and the most free in a way. And then there's about 4 more, but we don't have pictures of them.
Okay.
This is about 5 by 5. It's not a big painting at all. My paintings have gotten smaller in the last year or 2. I don't feel like making, except for that one, the first one we saw, the first puppet painting. That's about 6 by 8.5 feet. But most of these puppet paintings are very human scale. Yeah.
Go back.
And you can't see the colors very well. That bottom leg is also green. So it's brown, green, yeah. No, there is no blue. It's just Michael's taking pictures in poor light. Yeah. And again, this is changed. It's kind of cleaned up now. You see a lot more brushwork in this painting than you would in the final version. I just didn't want the ground to be so choppy that it competed with the image. Do you use that for puppets? No, my brain. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone has any other questions, now's your chance. Susan, why don't you just...
A lady is asking if we go to the last.
Oh, the last slide.
That's the last one. It's basically a white painting. I often mix a little black or a little raw umber into the painting to dirty it so it's not like too stark of a surface to hold the image.
I think this young man had a... Sorry, Jenny asked what Susan's relationship to horses were before she started the horse paintings? Yeah.
Very little. I did a little bit of riding at summer camp, and that's about it. It was just an image, and I think, part of it is I used to work for Nancy Graves as a slave in her studio building
Right.
camels.
I forgot that. There you
I
go.
was like, I helped her put a lot of, not the whole camel pieces, but I worked on legs. I mixed wax and marble dust, and she had about 5 of us in her studio helping her with her midlife work. And I think that I took those pieces of image home. I also was fascinated by the police horses in New York City. But that's it. I didn't have a relationship. Yes? Yes. Guston. I think he reached his end game. I mean, I think his last paintings are the paintings he was moving towards and needed to make, and he went, as I call it, all the way home, which is a prayer of mine if I live another 15, 20 years and continue to push myself to change. I hope I get there too. I don't think Jasper Johns got there. I don't think Robert Rauschenberg got there. Yes, he got there. There's probably lots more. I'm just... Yeah. Yeah, no, Guston is definitely one. And another painter that I've learned to start loving again is Seurat. One of my favorite paintings is one of the last paintings he ever did at the circus, which has a horse in it, but it's a white painting, it's very plain, and it's very mysterious. I like a little mystery in the art. Oh, thank you. Thank you all so much for coming out to hear us.
Oh, one more.
There's one there and one there. At the top. Yeah. Yes. Well, I didn't see any point in hanging on to some old principles that were pertinent in the early 70s. You know, at a certain point you evolve and you have to set your own limits of what you can and can't do. I mean, I'm still very big on composition. I have a lot of traditional aspects of the way I approach the four sides of a canvas. But yes, I mean, I'm older. I will paint what I wish to paint, and I'll try and find a way to paint it that's makes it a little screwy, a little weird to me. Yeah, it was growing up and old. Yes.
So I actually was first introduced to your work sort of by accident when I ran into a gallery and selling work and hadn't heard about it, and I was so blown away while other people were doing other things. And I noticed as I followed your work, as much as I could find it, which is not sometimes easy to find it in books and things like that, but
Just a couple, yeah.
but that you, your use of paint and your use of expression with paint, and I'm struck by what you said earlier about, you know, you tried abstract expressionism and it sort of left you cold, and yet in parts of your paintings, the way you put the paint on is just gorgeously abstract while you work within the parts and the figures. So I'm wondering what you think about that now and your approach to it, and what makes you choose a lot of, I mean, you chose so many whites before, and now there's this color, but you still see so much of this beautiful simpleness in white with all this.
Well, when you consider how much I like things to float in space rather than to be anchored to you know, I think the great freedom of painting is not to have the gravity. You don't have to get something that stands on the ground or hangs from a wire. The best floating color is white. Some of these paintings have had colored grounds, and I've always painted them out because then they just become a painted backdrop. The white acts as the space. It is usually mucked up a little bit, you know, but am I answering your question?
Yeah, and then the other thing was sort of your feeling towards, you know, how there's a way when you said abstract, the expression part left you cold, but do you still feel the same?
I didn't say abstract. I was painting abstract paintings. They were hard edge paintings. I think abstract expressionism is great, but I need an image. So it wasn't abstract. I love abstract expressionism, but I'm just not an abstract painter. I love de Kooning. He's another one that got up everywhere. He should go all the way home. Yeah.
What about painters, young painters today?
I don't get it a lot. A lot of it is so goofy and cartoony, the Japanese and the Chinese, and you know, flashy like Damien Hirst. And I almost feel like I've seen it before, not specifically, but I'm not really. I mean, there's some very good painters. Cecily Brown's a good painter that still has to find her way. She's, I think, in a confused period in her painting. But I have to tell you, I don't get to New York as much as I should. So I don't get into the city as much as I should, and I have to rely a lot on magazines, which isn't fair. So I can't comment with any breadth on contemporary art. I wish it well, and I wish it would get a little more serious and dig deeper. I've seen a lot of goofy stuff.
Maybe one more question.
Yeah. I didn't see a hand over there.
Oh.
Okay. The best part is thinking of a new image. That's on a piece of yellow pad, probably. And then maybe turning the page 2 or 3 times and doing a version of it and saying, mm-hmm. And then thinking, I've got a roll of canvas in my studio, and I think, is this guy want to be big or small or medium or horizontal or vertical? That's the next decision I make. And then I test it out. And it usually doesn't bear too much relationship to the drawing, but I let it grow as it wishes, and then if it still interests me in a few days, I'll stay with it. And maybe start a different version on the yellow pad. I think that's,
Well,
no questions for Mike?
No, I'm done. Thank you very much, Susan, for coming.
Okay, thanks.
This is a download from the University of California, Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. To find out more, visit bampfa.berkeley.edu.